So let's close our eyes for a prayer. Lord, I thank you for this day, Lord God, for the life of Eunjee, Lord Jesus. Lord, I pray that you will move, Panginoon, in our hearts as they share, Panginoon, what is it to be a YWAM-er, Lord God. Lord, I pray that this will be an impact to our hearts, Lord God. So as we apply this to our lives, Lord Jesus, we can also be impact to other people, Lord Jesus. Lord, I pray victory for this day, Lord God. And we acknowledge you, Holy Spirit, that you'll move, Panginoon, in our needs, Lord God. And I declare victory to this day in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Yeah, it's so amazing to be here with you guys. I just feel like I was just reading I don't know, one of the epistles this morning, and it just feels like I'm finally meeting another part of our family. Especially from being from YWAM, Kansas City. I've been there for 10 years and always heard about the YWAM-PH base and what you guys are doing here. And it really feels like, when Paul is writing to another church, it just feels like I'm finally meeting another church, another family, that we're all a part of this one family in another part of the world. And so it's just so cool to be here to actually see you guys, because we've heard so much about what you guys are doing. And I'm so thankful as have been part of the training team in Kansas City. I'm so thankful for all of the hard work you guys have done for hosting our short-term DTS teams. I know you guys have all been a part of that. Thank you guys so much for all that you guys have done and hosting them, loving on them, being their contacts. It's not easy hosting. It's not easy to do all the logistics and all the things that you have to plan for them. So I just want to say thank you guys so much. And it's so humbling to be here with you guys. Really see you guys as apostles, missionaries. You guys are really doing some really cutting edge missionary things, and I'm so blessed to be here. And again, just as somebody was saying, we're so open to talk and share more, and any questions or anything that we can pour out to you guys, and we want to learn from you guys as well. And so love to connect more. So anytime, we are so open. So yeah.
This is my actual first time to the Philippines. I'm really excited. Yeah. Growing up, I had a lot of Filipino friends. I think Filipino and Filipino Americans are a little bit different, but some things are similar. The food is similar. So I love Milo. I love Skyflakes. I went to a lot of debuts. It was really fun. I tried to do the Filipino martial arts with the knives, but I just got cuts in my arm. So I think Filipinos growing up were the coolest Asians for some reason. They always had the best style, the best clothes. And then for some reason now Koreans are really popular, so I feel awkward. I was never very popular, but I was no. But then it's funny because I come here, it's oh, are you a big Filipino? What's wrong? And then they look at me, it's oh, I'm actually Korean. It's oh, you're so cool. It's I'm really not that cool. I don't look very Korean at all. I don't know that many Korean things. My wife looks super Korean. And then my son Elisha, I think he's already loving it here. I think my wife tried to pick up Elisha. And then he's no, let me stay here. So I think we're having an amazing time already. So I just want to share with you guys, again, we're so happy to be here. It's almost like we're meeting family for the first time. You might have, in Filipino culture, I know there's you have cousins. It's oh, if you go to that city, you have cousins over there. If you go to this city, you have cousins there. And for us, it's oh, we're actually meeting cousins for the first time. So that's kind of the feeling that we have being here. So I know we might not know everyone's name in the room. We might look a little bit different, but I think we are a family. You are our cousins, and we're so happy to be here. With being a family, I just want to share a little bit about YWAM as a whole. Because I know for you guys, I know with the pandemic and everything, you guys were locked down for a really long time, right? More than any other country, probably. And then some of you guys have only been staff here not super long. I think less than 3 or 4 years. Some of you guys have been here a little bit longer. So I just want to share with you guys, a broader picture of what is our YWAM family, what is our actual family story. because I think it's really good to know what our last name means, right? You guys are YWAM Philippines Impact, right? And then there's the other side of your family called YWAM. So YWAM is kind of like your last name. It's like, oh, you grew up, this is like our family, this is the traditions that we have. When we cook adobo, we cook it this way. We use pork, we don't use chicken because that's our family, right? Real adobo is pork, not chicken. That's not what people would say. So as a family in YWAM, we use only pork. Unless you're Muslim, I guess, then you use chicken or something. So that's a different family. But do you know what I mean? Like, it's a family, we do things a very particular way. But at the same time, which we might have a little bit hard time, is we also have a first name. Meaning that, hey, we are part of this bigger family, but we are YWAM PH Impact, and we have some of our own core identities that we might do that specialize in different areas, right? At the same time, so how do we actually put those things together? How do we carry our last name, and then how do we carry our first name together, right? And so for me, I feel like I'm an old uncle coming in and just sharing, hey, this is the stories of what our family has been involved with, and that these stories are actually not just my stories or just your stories, but it's our story, because we're actually one YWAM family working together. So I just want to share a little bit of that part of it, so you guys are more aware of, like, hey, I actually have a part in this family. There's certain responsibilities that we have, but I know in our broader YWAM family, we're actually doing things together. Do you guys understand? Yeah. So I want to share what our last name means. Jerome, you have a question?
Is the English okay, faster, or?
You want me to go slower? I can go slower.
Faster. Everyone, the English is okay? It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's okay. Let's go.
It's okay.
Okay. Go a little slower. But you understand, right? We're gonna, as YWAM, we could. Adobo is pork. No, I'm just kidding. That's the main line. I'm just kidding. Do you guys know who the founder of YWAM is?
Yeah.
So his name is Lauren Cunningham, right? So I'm gonna just share the beginning of how YWAM started. How many of you guys are younger than 20 years old? Just one of you guys. Just. Elisha's definitely younger than 20 years old. So I just want to share a little bit of how mission started, right? And the reason I say like Lauren's age is because he was actually on a short-term mission trip to like an island, not too different from this, called the Bahamas, at like 20 years old, really young. And he saw other missionaries there that were also really young, but they were like kind of messing up. Like they were doing things they weren't supposed to be doing. But he was very surprised that like a lot of young people were actually doing missions. And at 20 years old, he goes down to sleep. And when he sleeps, he has this dream. And in this dream, he sees this massive wave coming from the ocean, right? And this massive wave, as it got closer and closer, he realized it was a wave of actually young people. And the young people, what it looked like was from different nationalities. So there'd be Filipinos, there'd be Africans, there'd be Koreans, there'd be Latinos, all from different places. And then this wave kept going to actually different countries. And this wave kept going back and forth into all these different nations. And the beautiful thing, it wasn't just Westerners or Americans going to the Philippines. It was actually every country and every person was going back and forth to all these different countries. And he woke up and he's like, wow, what does this dream mean? So he had that dream in 1956. And it took him 4 years of really processing with the Lord of what that dream really means. And 4 years later, he actually founded Youth with a Mission. Do you guys ever wonder why we were called YWAM, Youth with a Mission? It's like not a very good name. It's like, we don't even pronounce it right. It's like YWAM. I type in Google YWAM, it says Wong every time if I try to say it. But the letters are important because it goes back to the very beginning of the dream. It's like, it's actually all about young people. I mean, yes, there's people in missions, right? Or in YWAM that's a little bit older. But our main priority is to really champion young people. Does that make sense? So young people is at the heart of YWAM. So 1960, we start YWAM for the very first time. And then YWAM at that time, it was actually really, really small. Do you guys know how big YWAM is right now? In terms of, there's at least a YWAM person that works or has worked in the country. Of every country on earth, there has been a YWAMer there. And then you guys know DTS, right? Right now, there's over 5 million people have done a DTS. I don't know, but I think there is at least one in almost every, except for a few places, there's probably a base or a small team. So this is a base here, but there's certain groups where it's just really small, a few individual people in a country. Does that make sense? So almost every country in the world, or they're in a particular area where it's kind of dangerous to live there, so they visit there. And then at the time, like there's full-time YWAM staff. There's actually over 30,000 full-time YWAM staff. Just like you guys, who are full-time working, right? Doing long-term mission. And then the question is like, hey, how did we end up here from a guy that was just 20 years old, to be honest, not that different from you guys, and then how do we have this, what I would call a youth missions movement in the last probably couple decades? Do you guys ever have the question, how did it start from this guy to end up here? And how does that relate to me sitting in these seats right now? What does that mean? So I'm going to share a little bit of the story, and then we'll kind of take a break. But the big story that to kind of begin is that it's really God really believing in young people. And in the very early beginnings of YWAM, it was actually not okay to do what they would call like short-term missions. You guys know what that is? Like you guys host a lot of teams here, right? And they come in for 2 months and then they leave. Maybe that's the only missions you guys have probably seen before, but for the most part, that wasn't actually normal. Usually you have to go to college, and then you have to go to like another school, like a specialty school, and then once you do that, then you have to study language for 2 years, and then you could actually move to a different country to be like a missionary. So the average age of becoming a missionary before YWAM started, you would have to actually be 35. Right? It's actually very different. So, and I think it really moved because God really breathed on it about like, hey, God really wants to use young people and use people like you guys and me. Yeah. Even though I'm not that young anymore. I used to be young. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I want to share a little bit of like what God kind of like blessed in YWAM and maybe some things that didn't like move as much, because then you can see where God is really moving. So some of our story is that, hey, YWAM is a place that does a lot of training. And the first ever school that we ever ran in YWAM, it was actually not a DTS. It was not, we never actually used to run DTSs. So YWAM was founded in 1960, but our first training that we ever did of an actual school was actually 12 years later in 1972. And guess what it was? You guys would probably laugh because it's some things that you guys do now. The very first school that we did is called the School of Evangelism. Right? You guys do a ton of evangelism, right? You guys do campaigns. You guys do a lot of different shows with TX, and you guys do a lot of different campaigns to reach people. That was our very first school. But then Lauren, maybe a year later, he said YWAM was growing too slow. Right? Even though we had a school. And so in the dream, Lauren's like, oh, okay, what am I supposed to do, God? And he says, if you want to multiply, not adding, not like 1, 2, 3, 4, but multiply, which is like 2, 4, 8, 16, 24, 64, you actually have to have a different kind of training. So what ended up happening is a few years later, there was one of his staff in a different country, right? His name is Lee Perry, and he was discipling people in America in the 1970s, where it was really crazy. Like sex was everywhere, drugs was everywhere. They would follow Jesus, and he would ask them, hey, like, what's your background? Like, what do you know about God? And he said, all I know is sex, drugs, and money. That's all I know. I have no family, I have no friends, I was orphaned. This is all I know. And he asked Lauren, hey, can we do a DTS? And Lauren's like, what is a DTS? He's like, oh, because they have no background, they don't know anything, they actually need to be discipled. And they actually started in 1974 a discipleship training school for the very first time. And that was actually the pivotal thing of how YWAM actually grew to how big it was. Right? 5 million people in almost every country on earth, right? And then almost 30,000 full-time staff, and because of a DTS. Wow. It's crazy. A DTS did that. And the thing is, the DTS isn't even from the founder. It was from one of their staff. It wasn't Lauren or Darlene's idea. It was maybe an idea, let's say Tommy was doing something, and it was maybe working, but not the results we needed. But maybe it would be one of you guys saying, hey, Tommy, I think we should do this. And that actually really changed their whole mission. And the reason that Lauren really listened to that person is because it's in our name, YWAM, Youth with a Mission. How can we be youth with a mission if we don't believe our staff could actually hear God? And how can we actually do things for the kingdom of God if we don't champion young people? It's in our very name, in our nature, we're called Youth with a Mission. Do you guys feel that? Do you guys feel like, hey, as a staff person here, I can actually hear God? And as a staff person here, God actually talks to me. Because I'm very actually important to the mission that we have. And so I want to just share some stories around what a DTS can do. I think you guys know, like hosting DTSs, there's some teams that are amazing, and then some teams really suck. Right? Let's just be honest. Like they leave, and it's like, why is everything dirty? Why is it like worse than before? In Turkey, I've hosted teams too, so I understand. Some teams are amazing, and then some teams are just terrible. But why do we keep hosting them? And again, it's really believing two things. One is that we're a youth with a mission. Even though things don't go perfect all the time, we really do want to champion young people, youth. Does that make sense? And then the second thing is, hey, why we keep hosting short-term teams is because we believe the vision of the ways of young people going to and fro from every country to every country. And I really believe this too, and I know Tommy kind of talks about it, but you guys might feel like, hey, I might be lesser just because I'm Filipino, or like I'm always kind of stuck here. But I think there is a time coming where you guys will actually go to different countries. Does that make sense? I think even, just to be off topic, the Filipinos, there's this big word in English, it's called diaspora. Do you guys know what diaspora means? There is more Filipinos in every country on earth than any other nationality. Already. So I think there is a time coming for you guys where that will happen. But sometimes in the moments of hosting other cultures, you might feel lesser. And that's actually not YWAM. Because the very beginning is actually different countries going back and forth. And in the dream, it wasn't one culture was better than the other. It was every culture was actually needed to go back and forth. So it's really important for you guys to understand like how important you guys are. So I want to just share a little story of, and then we'll take a break with some questions of like why DTS is so important. And sometimes why DTSs are amazing and sometimes DTSs are like terrible. For sure, if I'm being honest. So in 1978, we had a DTS go to this island called Samoa. Have you guys heard of Samoa? Yeah, sometimes they refer to Samoans as big Filipinos. I don't know if that's true. So every time now, and I'm dark for Korean, so they would always think, yo, you're either Filipino or you're either a really big Filipino or you must be Samoan. So my wife, you guys know my wife, Eunjee, right? She looks really Korean, right? I used to have long hair like this long. So when the first time she met, she thought I was actually Samoan. I said, oh no, I need to get lighter skin, but I don't know how. Anyway, it's not about me. But I want to share about this DTS, right? There's this DTS in 1978 that as a short-term outreach team, they went to the island of Samoa. And in 1978, there's no internet. And then at the time, they were just praying as a school, like, hey, what country should we go to? It's like, oh, we prayed and really believed that we should go to Samoa. So they go to the island of Samoa. They see like the palace there, where the chief or the king lives. And they felt like they should need to like pray and march around the palace. I don't know why they had that idea, but in the Bible, when you pray and march over the palace, the whole city falls down, and then everything gets destroyed. So I don't know if that was the best idea. But they did it because they felt like they heard from God that's what they're supposed to do. And then after a while, they actually started worshiping in the very front of the palace. And then the palace guard actually came to them. It's like, hey, what are you guys doing here? It's like, oh, we're singing songs and worshiping to our God. His name is Jesus. And then the palace guard was like really interested. And the reason why the palace guard was really interested is because the king of Samoa was really interested. It's like, okay, who is this Jesus person? Who is your chief? Who is your king? Or who's the person that's in charge? It's like, oh, the person in charge is Lauren Cunningham. He's like, okay, if you want to share about Jesus to the king or chief of Samoa, you have to actually bring your chief because they're the same status. You can't have a lower person talk to me. You need to bring your king or your chief. So what ended up happening, there's no internet, guys. So they call Los Angeles United Airlines and say, can you please leave a message for Lauren Cunningham? It's like, okay, what's the message? The king of Samoa wants to meet with you. Can you fly to Samoa? So they left that message at the airport, but they can't text it, there's no email. So for 4 days, they went to the airport, believing that Lauren Cunningham would come.
Wow.
Right? Crazy, I would never believe it. And can you imagine being a DTS student? You go there the first day, the second day, the third day, it's like, oh my gosh, I heard from God wrong. Or my leaders are stupid. They heard from God wrong. Right? You would think that, I would think that. But on the 4th day, they go to the airport, 6 p.m. Lauren Cunningham comes off the plane of United Airlines. And he says, hey, I got your message that you wanted me to share the gospel with the King of Samoa. And the idea that came from of doing that, of making the call, leaving the message, wasn't the DTS outreach leader. It was the DTS student. To risk, right? So they pick up Lauren. The next day, they say, hey, this is our chief that we talked about. This is Lauren Cunningham, and he wants to share with you. So he goes, and he actually shares the whole gospel story. And then the king of Samoa said, from this day on, Samoa will be a Christian nation.
Wow.
And this is actually from a DTS team. And this is not even the idea of a DTS outreach leader. This is someone probably 18 years old, not that different from you, probably less experienced than you guys, hearing God and just simply obeying Him. Does that make sense? And I'm just saying that as a person, as a cousin, as a family member, maybe like an older brother. You can call me Kuya, it's okay. If you like Korean, you can call me Hyung or Opa, that's okay. But I share that because they're not more special than you. Does that make sense? They're not more anointed than you. They don't hear God better than you. There's nothing actually distinguished about them that would be like, I'm more special than you. The reality is that, hey, in YWAM, we really believe everyone can hear God's voice, and we actually have to simply obey. Right? And that's why we have amazing DTSs, and that's why we have some terrible DTSs. Because we want to do the simple thing of just obeying and following Jesus. And then YWAM, just so you guys know, and you guys already know by hosting short-term teams, we will always risk this way of failure because we really want to champion young people. That's our value, right? What Danny and Becca shared with you, champion young people. Do you guys remember what number that is?
6.
Number 6, right? And that's how we actually make decisions. Even though they might mess up or make mistakes of hearing God's voice, that's the area we want to lean into. And that's part of our YWAM heritage and our family and our DNA. Does that make sense? All right. So let's take a break, maybe for 5 minutes. We'll come back together, and I'll just want to share a little bit more about YWAM and our stories. But I just want to ask maybe 2 questions you guys talk about as we go for a break. It's like, hey, what is some areas that you guys are learning about YWAM that are different than what you guys experience is. It's like, hey, I heard about this story that you shared, but my experience is actually different. And then maybe you guys can talk about that in your groups or your tables. Is that okay? So, and then in 5 minutes we'll come back together. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys.